Right, good morning, everybody. And gosh, someone was pointing out to me this week we're nearly at day 100, which means I've now lost count of how many weeks it is since October the 13th, especially as we went into a new year. It's a lot of weeks, and we've had a lot of amazing people joining us every Friday morning. It was so lovely as Jeremy came on to say, "Oh, it's so nice to see you." And as always, how sad that it's this way that we have to be meeting up, and always how wonderful that we can meet up this way and stay connected without even having to meet in person. But I have to say, so many more people are coming into the building that we are able to continue reconnecting everywhere, which is wonderful. Anyone who doesn't know me, I am Judy Trotter. I head up adult education at JW3. Best work job in the world, apart from everybody else who's also doing the best jobs. Obviously, we all enjoy our work. And I'm going to stop at that point and welcome Jeremy. So Jeremy, I know a lot of you on this call know him. He's a London lad, and even once moving to Israel, has kept connected with all of us. Started the wonderful Jewish Journeys, does tours around Europe, a phenomenal educator. The official stuff is that he studied Jewish history at University College London and at Hebrew University. He's lived in Israel since 1992, and now he lectures at the Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem. He also works extensively in the field of Jewish travel, which I've talked about. At HUC, he's coordinated the Richard J. Sher Israel Seminar for the Year in Israel program. Everything has such a long title.
No.
Apologize.
That's so not necessary.
Absolutely. And he's also director of the HUC JIR JDC Fellowship for Global Jewish Responsibility. As you can see, a really good guy, a really good educator. Jeremy, and as always, Jeremy will speak for a certain amount of time, then we'll take questions. As always, thank you to those who've already sent in. For the rest of you, please put your questions in the chat. We'll decide when we get to it whether I bring anybody on or whether I just ask them as usual. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Jeremy. I know it's not an easy task, and in some ways, maybe it's getting a harder ask each week. But what would you like to share with us this morning? What's most on your mind?
Well, actually, you already named part of it. I just want to check. We're going to talk about like 15 minutes or so, and then stop for Q&A. Is that that's the general time plan? Yeah. So, morning, everybody. It's very nice to see everyone. And I have to say, in itself, without sounding particularly cheesy or schmoozy, it is actually in a strange way. These are the things which I think are incredibly uplifting and heartening. Is particularly, I don't know. Just feeling connected. It's I work as Judy said in the field of Jewish education, which is a kind of a euphemism for kind of digging way too deep into things that maybe is absolutely necessary. But this notion of being connected for me resonates and has been one of the most powerful things of the last 3 months. Both, by the way, between Israel and the diaspora, but actually probably more than anything else, I think inside Israel. So I'm keeping an eye on the time. One of the I really did get caught of like thinking, well, what on earth is there to say that's happened this week that wasn't said that happened the week before? And Judy, you mentioned we're coming up for this 100th day anniversary, which in itself is a sort of a it's a milestone. It's actually no more meaningful or meaningless than anything else. But what we need these things. For me, what I take from it is it's a recognition about the something of time. And that, by the way, is a little bit of what I wanted to kind of just share very briefly, which is this is not, in trying to think, so what is my week like? It felt like my week was very similar to the week before. And that's actually the point. There's an expectation of things moving quickly. A colleague this week made the point on a broader level that, quite a lot of the contemporary Jewish world is built on the idea of the constant need to repair things, to make things better, to always moving towards on the assumption that there is a better world on the other side. Now, I'm not going to sound as bleak as this sounds like it's going, but my real deeper question that I think I've been sitting with a lot this week, thinking about this 100-day thing, it's also been starting up my second semester with my students. So we've been almost the whole year dealing with the war. What does it mean to think about something on the longer term? If you want to keep it sharp, a recognition that maybe we, the Jewish people, are having to relearn some skills about long-term grief, pain, sitting in things where one does not see an immediate end coming up. And that, by the way, is very much, that's a comment that's reflected, I think, in the news. The deep frustration, I think, here of this constant voice from the outside world of the need for a ceasefire, the need for the ceasefire, the need to finish things. No one wants the ceasefire, I think, more than anybody else, I think, in real terms than here, because nobody wants anyone else to suffer. But on the other hand, if the job can't be done over in a short period of time, and with all the sacrifices that are met, then that means steeling oneself and recognizing that we're in for the longer haul. So yeah, it's not a particularly cheery thing to kind of kick off with, but for me, it's this question of in what way has the longevity of the war started to change or alter maybe the aperture or the lens upon which we look at ourselves and the world around us. In terms of some specifics, I'll just say, and then there's one particular sort of brief, very sort of section. It's a kind of a couple of lines from a text that I wanted to share. Just on the personal level, this week it does mark a couple of things. My eldest daughter was living in the north of Israel, was evacuated in the first week, and finally this week sort of settled herself into a new life in Tel Aviv and managed to get her cat. Which was also taken from the north, but could not be on the move around friends' houses and so on. And so, it's a very small, tiny little thing that, the sort of the moving on and the recognition that sort of something passed, she's settling into something whatever new. And my youngest, I have three daughters. My youngest daughter finished the army in September, was supposed to go traveling, and it's a little bit of the drama of, I think, our family life is that we're all experiencing the war in lots of different ways, but probably the most kind of close up is through the lives of soldiers who are all basically close friends, people who've been in our house for as long as our daughters have had, been alive and had friends and been whatever. And, there was a moment this week when as I said, she was in education, social work in the army, so it's not on Miluim. But as I say, only finished 2 weeks ago, 3 months ago, and all of her close friends are in Gaza. Someone got out this week for 24 hours. The entire world changed. Everything changed because somebody came home, and there's a quick conversation, a quick sort of supping up of all of the drama, I think, in various people's lives, and that has now sat with us. The stories that are told about life at the front and the challenges suddenly become part of one's everyday life in a way that one could never imagine them having ever been before. It's a very tough one. As I said, it's sort of, in a way, I'm going to go back to the theme of time. I'm looking at the evolution of, not my 31 years of living in Israel, but really just in the life of being a parent, of watching children evolve into new identities. They're all in their 20s, and how in the last 3 months, so many conversations, which are things I never really would wanted to have ever had that conversation about death, about life in the country, about unity, about these sorts of things. And these moments, I think, dealing with friends who are in action is, I think, sharpens it. Maybe one other small little point, but it does lead us in a similar direction, which is the news this week that 2 of my neighbors in the village next door to us were arrested for planning to blow up the neighborhood or something like the neighborhood, which sounds flippant, but it's and again, it sort of circles around, I think, the piece where I'm heading for, which is in this kind of drip of living on an ongoing war. This is, it's a war. It's not a military campaign. It's mamash a war on 3 fronts. How does it affect all of the things that we live with? So part of that is our lives and our self-image. How does it affect us and our relation with our neighbors? And it's very hard if the conclusions that you come to are not the ones that you wanted to have before. That's actually a kind of, for me, one of the key motifs, I think, of education, which is when you study the past or you even look at the present, how much or what are we trying to do is to read the events in order to reinforce what we previously believed. So we're not really learning, we're reinforcing. and how much are we reading the events of the past or the present and actually being open to seeing things new and, you know, getting fresh perspectives, which, by the way, may be very painful because they may challenge our previous thoughts, the things we previously believed in. My politics are very much geared towards reconciliation and trying to kind of work out peaceful relations between Israel and the Palestinians, or between the Jewish people and the outside world. And there's nothing that's done worse for that than the last 3 months, to the point that, you know, I still think my core values remain the same, but I'm, whatever, I think like everybody else, is forced to kind of confront all of this. The shenanigans in The Hague on the charge of genocide, which thankfully we're taking seriously and responding to, you know, is another kind of reminder that, you know, the expectation that international justice is supposed to work in a certain kind of way, maybe reading the events of the present and, well, the past and the present, tell us that actually, no, nothing actually, something, my desire for the outcome to be much nicer than I thought it was is not true. You know, people who are suffering, having been attacked by a very self-declared genocidal organization, find themselves in the dock. Not that one shouldn't be accountable, God forbid, accountable for one's actions. If we've committed war crimes, we have to know that. But I'm not sure that that's really what's going on in The Hague at the moment. But I want to kind of just circle back before pausing to say that I think the thing that is uppermost in my mind is a little bit of a question, which I've kind of hinted at it. Friends of daughters, friends of friends, are very, very, really one of my closest friends whose son's been, been called up for the last 2.5 months. After 2.5 months, finally got news yesterday that they're now going to be on the front line. And so all of a sudden it stokes up all the anxiety about that side of the war, which maybe doesn't feature in the media, which is the personal lives of the people that we know and love. And I think, by the way, it's a kind of a reflective moment, I think, for Israelis. And I think, by the way, for talking to anybody, which is, you know, when you imagine your society and you as a citizen within that society, within that country, how close, what's the proximity between your identity as a citizen and your relationship with the state? And, you know, my years in the UK, I had a great 27 years living in the UK. I'm not coming with any kvetch here. But I would say that my sort of relationship between my Britishness and my, you know, it's kind of, I don't know, here, could have gone here, maybe there. But I think there's a feeling at the moment that it's so visceral, the connection between the citizen or the member of society and the state, and the sense of the collective is so close that every single minute is lived collectively. And that's incredibly powerful. So what really was the drama of the moment? In the middle of the week, the news that 9 soldiers were killed, just over half of them in one very awful accident in an attempt to try and blow up a Hamas tunnel, and then seeing the funerals being broadcast on television. That is a nightly ritual, which, please God, you know, doesn't happen all the time, because soldiers are killed. Lots of soldiers have been killed, but not every single day. But the need to put people's grief and suffering on the television is an expected norm. I mean, it's not that it's without criticism, but it's a recognition of this kind of close proximity of that the funeral is not a private affair, it's a public affair, because we're all in some way grieving with that family and wanting to reach out. And that sounds very highfalutin. Maybe it sounds very grandiose. Maybe it means that, you know, that's getting caught up in the drama of war. But for me, that feels very, very close. But it's a way of keep circling around what for me came out in a lesson that I was teaching with my students this week, which was examining this question of the role of the military in Israeli society, issues about power, the Jews and power, how in our recent history, we've tried to change our relationship with the world around us by changing the demands, the nature of the power that we have. In very simple terms, diaspora Jewish life is largely built around the notion of soft power. And Jewish life, I think, in the state of Israel includes soft power. That's non-coercive power, culture, civilization, making a difference in those kind of involuntaristic kind of ways. But here it includes hard power. That's coercive power, where if you're attacked, you can defend yourself. And it's I'm going to kind of share one piece, which was the text that I was using with my students this week, and I thought I would share it, because it seems interesting. Not this, actually. This I was on a slide I was going to show before, but you can kind of get the idea. It's a little bit about this idea, achdut, of unity built around very tragic circumstances. But I wanted to just very briefly share this, a text I was sharing with students, which is a eulogy that was given by Moshe Dayan in his time as the chief of staff in 1956, in April 1956. And so the whole point is, it is a reflection on time. It's a matter of kind of thinking what has changed, what has not changed. A young farmer who'd moved to kibbutz Nachal Oz. You see the poignancy of the moment. Nachal Oz, one of the scenes of one of the worst massacres on October the 7th. But back in 1956, Roy Rottenberg was a young farmer who'd moved from Tel Aviv in order to be, well, actually, he was a farmer and a guard on the kibbutz. And he was killed by a Palestinian terrorist who came in from Gaza. And Moshe Dayan, as the chief of staff, gave the eulogy at the cemetery. And it's a very iconic text. It's taught a lot in schools, and it's controversial, it's complicated, and it certainly doesn't sit very easily. In the first part, which I've not put up on the screen, what Moshe Dayan says is we have to come to terms with the fact that the people who are living in Gaza have suffered enormously, and that their lives are testament to the tragedy of the war that remains unresolved between our two nations. So largest number of people in Gaza are refugees from the war of 1948. But then he moves to this, which is to say, but the reality is we live in a world where we're surrounded by an enormous amount of hatred. And that's something which we, in some existential sort of way, have to really grapple with. So this is very tough. I know it's Friday morning. I've kind of gone in very, very deep, but I'm just going with where I'm at and what I think is the. And he says this, and it's the piece I put in larger letters. He says, well, we mustn't avert our eyes lest our hands be weakened. That is the decree of our generation. That is the choice of our lives, to be willing and armed, strong and unyielding, lest the sword be knocked from our fists and our lives be severed. It's really a bold statement that in a way runs as a continuous theme through our lives in all the various parts of the Jewish world, which is, well, what is the nature of the power that we have to look after ourselves, to protect ourselves, to avoid danger, and what are the sacrifices that go with it? And so really my point is, I think, is to say this, that much as I've been kind of thinking this week about my neighbors, about my friends' children, about my friends' my daughter's friends and my friend's child who's just gone back into the army, and watching funerals, is that we're living in this horrible situation where, in a way, I don't know that we're being tested, but we're living with this harsh reality of the meaning of what having, power really means. Now, of course, somewhere this need to be willing and armed and strong and unyielding, that becomes at a certain point, like this idea of the longevity of being in a war zone, how it does affect us. My fear is that it doesn't affect our core identity and we become brutalized. But at the same time, we're in the court in The Hague defending our right to defend ourselves. And what we're saying is that there is no morality for the Jewish people if we can't defend ourselves. In other words, it's a moral principle to be able to defend ourselves from what's happened. It leaves sitting out there lots and lots of other things about the nature of what power is, what the excesses of power are, and so on and so forth. But I'm going to pause it there because I think the idea was to keep this short and kind of succinct. I don't know if that was succinct, but I hope that there was a couple of nuggets there. And as I said, it's a little bit of a summary of, I think, the things that have been going around my head this week. They're not comfortable, but none of this is comfortable. So let me pause it there, and then I'm going to pass it over and see if anyone, feel free to pick up on any of it or ask any questions, and we'll see where we go with it.
Thank you so much. Yes, you hit it the point absolutely right. As you spoke in that way, I'm going to allow people to speak themselves, but let's just, you touched on the question we had in before. I just wanted to know whether you wanted to add any more into whether Israel's in more danger, added danger, from the South African allegations of genocide.
So going back to one of the other little bits of my week, so I had this crazy evening a couple of nights ago where I did 3.5 hours of teaching, an hour and a half with some Jewish educators in North America, which was great on Zoom, and then I had 2 hours with UK non-Jewish teachers in the UK school system through the Holocaust Education Trust, which is a place where I do quite a lot of work, and where a lot of teachers are feeling anxiety in their ability to teach Holocaust in the light of the war that's going on. And so we kind of set up a forum, not that dissimilar, for people to put in questions. And one of the comment, and so this wasn't the teacher was saying, these are things picked up in the classroom, saying, I used to feel really okay about teaching about the Holocaust, but now I find it that much harder. I used to feel sympathy for the Jews, but now I see they're perpetrators of genocide, and therefore I don't want us to be teaching about the Holocaust anymore. And part of me wanted to say, excuse the expletive, but F you, like, really, that's the depth of your commitment to to learning about the Holocaust. You were fine when the Jews were dying. You're really not comfortable when the Jews are defending yourselves. So I think the significance of the court in The Hague is, listen, that's, unfortunately, it's a little bit of the denigration of International Court of Justice, that it's a very political institution. Is this really a good forum for discussing whether Israel's conduct in the war? I don't know. I have my doubts, and I'm kind of keen to hear what happens with the Israeli defense. From everything I'm reading, the case that was made is very, very thin, and is largely is a kind of it's a conflation, because there's a confusion between what are just the sad, tragic, awful, painful, by the way, no less painful scenes dealing with the suffering of people who get killed in war. That's kind of the other side of what I'm talking about. But because people get killed in war, it doesn't automatically make it a genocide. That's a race to the lowest common denominator, or rather, whatever, and that's the bad phrase. But so it's a kind of feels a little bit media stuntish, or a little bit political polemic, to kind of conflate a tragic war in an urban setting in which civilians are used as human shields to automatically being genocide. And there's a lot to be said. I'm not going to kind of repeat the arguments why this is not a genocide, but I'll just say that a conversation I was having with a Palestinian colleague at work the other day sort of said, well, if your people are trying to destroy my people, how come we're having this conversation here in the comfort of the Moadon at work? And so, but it's dangerous, because I think it changes our perception. We do not want to be in the club of nations where this is somehow, even if it hasn't stuck, it's around us. But again, like everything else, what else is a person supposed to do? And so I think that there is much more to be said. But I think mainly I think it is dangerous. I think it's worrying, because it makes it much harder for us to operate. And as I said, the reason I gave you the anecdote about teaching in UK schools is that I just think, well, so what happened? I mean, well, I'll give the blunt example. I mean, I was teaching. I did was doing a trip for teachers in Lithuania 2 weeks into the war, and it was kind of quite heavy stuff, I have to say, dealing with mass murder going on at the time, and then dealing with mass murder from history with a group of non-Jewish teachers who are lovely, wonderful people. But someone raised the question, which is, what room is there for talking about Palestinians in Holocaust education? And I wanted to say, not almost none, not none, but almost none. And I just see that this media, sort of blurring. It's a kind of a horrible revisionism that in the end doesn't help Palestinians, and it certainly doesn't help Jews.
Thank you. Just before I go into the next one, I wanted to ask, you mentioned your neighbors talking. Remind us where you're actually based in Israel.
Where am I? Yeah, I live in Jerusalem in a sort of lower middle class neighborhoods, which is where we can afford now our mortgage, called Amon Naziv, otherwise sometimes known as Talpiot Mizrahi, East Talpiot. It's before 67, it was in sort of, the Green Line went round it. It was Shetach Hefker, sort of no man's land. So we're both over the Green Line and not over the Green Line simultaneously, which is great. It's great as a teaching tool, if nothing else, to kind of work out what borders are about. But anyway, what it means is that we're at the southern tip of Jerusalem, and our two neighbors are a village called Jebel Mukaba and a village called Sur Bacha. And since we're on it, by the way, and again, I'm just putting it out there because I hate that kind of, I mean, I put it in because it was like shocking. It did the rounds of the family WhatsApp group very quickly. These two people that got arrested, did we see them in the bank? Did we see them in the supermarket? But that's what they were doing. I will just say that at the same time, the other thing, there's a small project, a charity project I'm involved in, which is about whatever, it's about nutrition and food poverty, and it was about trying to kind of get, make sure that kids in Jerusalem schools have enough food. We work across the Green Line, so we work in Surbacha. So our other neighbours, this week we were kind of talking about a project in Surbacha, where we have fantastic relations. So, I'm cautious because I know what I said sounded a bit grim, but I don't want that to be the sole message of my neighbourhood.
Excellent, thank you. I say we speak of 100 days nearly, and the question is, are we in fact engaged in a war lasting years, not weeks? And he's actually thinking, thank you, Alan, of the 100 Years' War. Anything that hits from that?
Days, I mean, weeks, months, I don't know, whatever, but years. I think that is a very, very good point. I don't know about 100 years. I mean, whatever. There's enough other things to kind of worry about for the next 100. But I think the idea that this is I don't know whether it's a civilizational war, it's a structural war, it's a regional war. I mean, we're fighting the war on three fronts. The Houthis, who in the south, and then Hezbollah in the north, all lead to a kind of a conclusion that this isn't about Israel and Palestinians. And I think, by the way, certainly, it's not an easy case to make, but I think for me it's very powerful. The war with Hamas is not a war with the Palestinians. I think everyone probably is familiar with that. Hamas is an ideology that grew out of the Muslim Brotherhood, and it has its roots in the 1930s in a very vicious kind of anti-Semitic side of a certain type of radical Islam. That means that the roots go way, way, way deeper than just whatever the suffering of people in Gaza is. And therefore, to go back to the question, this will not be resolved immediately. So are we in something much deeper? Now, you could tip to something which was also in the news this week, because Anthony Blinken was in town and the Saudis were involved, and there was a discussion about, that the Saudis are still on board for trying to make peace with Israel if Israel can come to terms with the idea of a Palestinian state, which for me would be that's my politics. I'd be very much in favor. But that's a slower process than it was going to be before October the 7th, that's for sure. But in other words, are we transitioning to a new period where actually, rather than seeing the endless conflict, we might see the managing of the conflict and the reduction in tensions? In other words, depends on the outcome. If what emerges from this is a resolution whereby there's dialogue with Palestinians, the Saudis, the Egyptians, I don't know the Qataris, but somebody else gets involved, then maybe we see, and Israel has a government which, understands the rules of democracy, then we may be spiraling to de-escalation. But I think I'm not optimistic. I have to say, I do feel that we live in a region which is essentially characterized by failed states. Almost all the countries in our region are failed states or failed national projects. It's not a nice thing to say about the Palestinians, but I fear that their national project, is faltering so badly that it leaves its kind of entrails around the region. So that means that we're the only successful non-failing states in the region essentially are us, and that's not so that means there'll be turbulence, there'll be war. So is it heading that way? I really I really hope not, but I think that this is, we are in for something much longer than I think we thought on October the 7th.
Yeah, for sure. The news this week has been much more focused, and it was going to be my last question, was on it becoming a regional war. US and UK sending stuff over yesterday, and it gives you another feeling. And
yeah, cynically, I mean, I'm waiting. I was going to post on Facebook yesterday, but since the algorithm has cut me out, or it's the most meaningless kind of expression of nothing, posting something, whatever. But I'm just waiting to see when are the calls for the ceasefire for UK to stop getting involved with the Houthis. It took about 30 seconds to call for a ceasefire the moment, and we lost 1,200 people on October the 7th. So don't hurt the Houthis. I mean, I don't want to hurt anybody, but yes, it is growing. It is going in that direction. And I think the big talk has been definitely about Hezbollah in the north, and we're waiting to see. This week, there was a big escalation in the north, and I think a lot of it is brinkmanship. But the fear that somehow it could spiral, that's there.
Okay, now I need to ask you, even though we've got to 9:30, give us a sentence of optimism.
Oh, I'm permanently optimistic. I mean, I'm optimistic about my country. Okay, the first comment is blatantly political. So please, I'm not going to upset. I'm just going to deal with the reality, but my spin on it. There was an opinion poll yesterday about if there was an election tomorrow, etc., etc. So one part of optimism is that if there was an election tomorrow, we would have a very different government, one which was more committed towards Israeli democracy, and certainly one which would take, I think, would make those critical moves towards being able to engage diplomatically with Palestinians without an outcome. I think actually some commentary that I was reading, which says that the case in The Hague, doesn't actually have a lot of teeth in it, and that there's something to be kind of looking to there. I think the resolve in Israeli society is so strong that even though we've moved to now what is called phase 3 of the war, the reduction of the number of troops and more focused single raids to try and defeat the enemy, that we may be in for the longer haul, but less lives will be lost. And there's already the beginning of much more movement towards people going back to their homes and humanitarian aid. It's an interesting piece, by the way, in the Israeli press today, sort of calling out this question that no one's suggesting that life of the Palestinians in Gaza is fantastic, but all the cries of almost starvation in some areas, yes, but in a lot of areas, absolutely not. But I think that that in some ways we can see the beginning of an incremental move to de-escalate in some area. The last comment, which in the end probably it may not be very satisfying, but I think this question of optimism is a little bit about a state of mind more than anything else. And for me, pessimism is not really an option in being Jewish. So therefore, core beliefs remain the same, and core expectations that we will emerge out of this as a better society and safer, and hopefully in better relations with the world around us.
Amen. So interestingly, we were talking yesterday about the difference between, or Raymond was, of optimism and hope, and he's wanting us to be hopeful. So we'll go forward with that as well. Jeremy, thank you so much. There was so much for you to say. I feel bad I just say talk for 30 minutes, but it's always nice to hear the questions as well. So you dealt with those beautifully too. Thank you. It's pleasure. As always, when I'm saying this, it's so wonderful to see you and reconnect with you, but how sad it has to be under these circumstances.
Absolutely.
Thank you everyone for joining us and for engaging and listening. Next week we have a journalist, which will be first, so it will be yet a different voice. And thanks to Andrea for connecting me with and the details will be up on the web on Monday. And one new event that just went online yesterday is on the 22nd, so week Monday, with Dan Senor, who wrote A Genius of Israel, and that will be in our hall on the 22nd of January. It's on the homepage now if you look. I wish you all a good week, a safe weekend, and a Shabbat Shalom. Jeremy, you and your family stay safe, send our love to them, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
And in Jerusalem. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Take care.